Hi everyone, hope you're all well. I had a little break, about 2 weeks. My family came to visit me, and so the last 2 weeks of videos that you watched were pre-recorded, and today I'm back to creating videos and doing the artsy stuff. I did have a few kind of painting sessions with watercolors during those 2 weeks, and I have learned something or realized there's this certain style that I wanted to learn to paint, and I haven't unfortunately found any video where someone talks about it. So I came to it by purely experimenting and sketching and just trials of different styles. And this is what I want to base the video on about. So the I would call this a modern way to do botanical painting, because the botanical paintings, the classic way is obviously to create a very realistic kind of illustration of a flower, or it could be fruit or vegetable or anything like that that comes from a garden, and it almost looks like it was photographed. And people who do it are incredibly talented, but it doesn't mean that because you don't have the patience to sit for quite a few hours and perfect every single millimeter of that painting, it doesn't mean that you're not talented. And I personally like things that I can create fast and quick and get the enjoyment out of it, because I'm a mom to a 2-year-old and I have very little time, and it's very precious, the time that I do have. And so I want to have sort of instant pleasure and joy from it, and this is it for me. And yeah, I refer to it as modern botanical way of illustrating flowers. And so today I want to share that with you, and I hope you'll find it useful if this is something you are looking for. So I'll just talk you through a little bit before I get on with the process. I'll just explain how the journey that I had to take to come to this. So a while ago I decided to use so this one is done with the Pilot G-Tech C4, and because it's a water-soluble ink, I can only use it, or you can only use it on top of your illustration. So you start off by obviously sketching with pencil or going in straight with watercolor, and then on top you then do these very light, hardly any pressure sort of lines to have very fine lines. But I have to tell you that this carbon ink, platinum carbon ink in extra fine, is thinner than the G-Tech C4, and that is great. So the difference of this style, I still wasn't very happy with it because it felt quite sketchy to me. And the difference is you're layering the ink on top of the watercolor, so regardless of how fine you go, it still will be standing out quite a bit more. Whereas in something like this, if you go with a dark watercolor, you barely will be able to see the line, and if you go for opaque watercolors, then that will be the same. I particularly like, for this style, I like transparent watercolors, and because I want to be able to see the details that I am making with my ink pen. I don't want them to be covered up. So that's the difference. So I did that, and I kind of wasn't too I was okay with it, but it wasn't the style that I was looking for. And the same thing here as well. So the line is very strong, it's quite dominant because it is finishing the illustration rather than starting it. And then over here I tried the same thing. So this was a different pen, however I don't remember which pen it was. It might have been one of my Faber-Castell Pitt pens, or it could have been the Micra pigment, what is it called? The Micron Pigma, yeah. So I don't remember which thickness it was, but clearly way too thick because it just makes this illustration look quite... I'm not happy with it, the way it came out. There is just something way too sketchy and even slightly messy, I would say. Then the next one was this. So here the same thing, I applied the ink over the watercolor and it's very harsh. It's a style on its own, but it's definitely too harsh. You basically end up looking at the black lines rather than at the watercolor. So if you had a very pretty watercolor situation, let's call it that, somewhere over here, you would not be able to appreciate it fully because the black lines are covering everything. And so this, by the way, was the idea I had for Inktober. I ended up drawing girls rather than flowers, but that's just an example of the style. And then one of my latest, which you have seen a tutorial, I've done a tutorial on these whimsical flowers. If you haven't, I do recommend you have a look because I think you will learn from it. And the same kind of style I then applied to a more realistical way of drawing a flower. So these are fun and pretty and whimsical and kind of, you know, they don't have realism about them. And I've done exactly the same thing that I've done here. The only difference, like I said, is these are more realistic. So here I'm actually looking at the flower either from photograph or from a magazine, and then I trace, kind of, not trace, but sort of copy the lines, but I try to kind of exaggerate slightly in some ways to have my own style and not just copy what I see, and that way make it look a bit more pretty. So for example, this composition right here, I was looking at a photograph, but I changed things around just to break them up a little bit more and create what I thought was a balanced composition. So the style that I've done here as well as here is basically using this pen, which I'm absolutely addicted to, carbon ink pen, and the platinum carbon ink as well in black. And I love it. It's great because it's completely water soluble, so you can start with it. I haven't done any pencil work here at all. I basically, what I would do, I'll show you quickly. I would, for example, and this is a little gardening magazine, and if you want to know what exactly this one is, I'll tell you. It's Sarah Raven, and it's got lovely photographs, and so I used it for that sort of reason. And as you can see, for example, this flower, I looked at this composition right here and then just took one flower and done it that way. And yeah, so basically that's what I have done. So first of all, I would draw really slowly and carefully with this pen, and then I didn't need any correction. If you go quite neatly and thinly, you won't make any mistakes. If you do quite quickly, then that's where you're likely to create the mistakes. So anyways, and then over the top, make sure, however, that the ink really dries well before you go in. Don't go in straight after, for example, you draw a line and then go in with watercolor, it will kind of move a little bit, but you do need to make sure it's completely dry. And once that is dried, the ink is dry, you then can start the watercolor. And yeah, that's all I've done, quite literally. And I quite like this spread because you it's sort of like a botanical kind of a lovely sort of flowers to look at, and it reminds me, you know, and then I also like to put the name, so it reminds me what flower it actually is, and if I want to buy them or plant them in my garden at some point, I can kind of use it as a reference, and I think that's quite nice. And this entire sketchbook, which is Stillman and Byrne hardbound sketchbook, is basically my floral sketchbook. So I've done different styles here, and I have learned what I like, what I don't like. It was very experimental, and towards the end I have found my style. It's literally one page left, so once I've done with the next page, I then can show you the flip through. And by the way, if you haven't seen, there is a flip through of half of this sketchbook, which I already done, and there is, you can see the video for that, and then I will do the second half after I'm done with the last page. So I think I covered off everything, and let's go ahead and do some floral painting.